Right. And what we're looking at is the prophetic reading, the Haftarah for Chayei Sarah. So Chayei Sarah starts with the life of Sarah. Sarah dies. She's buried in Hebron, in the special cave that the Torah talks about Abraham buying from the Hittites. Then Abraham has to worry about getting a wife for his son Isaac. So we have that's the bulk of the Torah reading. And the servant, traditionally identified as Eliezer. His name is not mentioned in our Torah reading, but Eliezer is mentioned as Abraham's servant elsewhere. So Eliezer goes, and finally he meets up in the town where Abraham's family is, and Rebecca comes out, and she's so generous and wonderful, and she gives water to everybody, and that proves that she's the right one. She comes back, she marries Isaac. They live happily ever after, so to speak. But they are actually in love with each other, and Isaac is comforted finally over the loss of his mother. And then there's the wrapping up at the end. Abraham lives, longer. I wrote about this in the Torah Sparks. And then everybody gets sent away so that Isaac will be the only heir of Abraham's estate. So Isaac takes over. God blesses Isaac, and that's pretty much the end of the Torah reading. So now we're going to the Haftarah, and we have the reading from the first book of Kings, the very first chapter. So this is early prophets, so to speak. And we'll see that there is a prophet who plays a prominent role in our story. So without further ado, let's get into it. So the text is First Kings, chapter 1. If you don't have the Eitz Chaim, if you have the Eitz Chaim, it begins on 143. 143 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash. So somebody please volunteer to read for us. All right, Sarita, go.
Okay. From the top?
From the beginning, 1-1.
King David was now old.
1-1-1. It's
One, right.
1,
That's
1.
right, 1-1-1. King David was now old, advanced in years, and though they covered him with bedclothes, he never felt warm. His courtiers said to him, "Let a young virgin be sought for my lord the king, to wait upon your majesty and be his attendant, and let her lie on your bosom, and my lord the king will be warm." So they looked for a beautiful girl throughout the territory of Israel. They found Abishag the Shunammite and brought her to the king. The girl was exceedingly beautiful. She became the king's attendant and waited upon him, but the king was not intimate with her.
Okay, so what do we do with this little piece of narrative?
Good to be the king.
It's right, good to have people watching out for you, right? Taking care of your every need. Any thoughts about how this connects up one way or another with our Torah reading?
Well, Abraham is old, and he actually remarries, right? You don't, as you said, we don't end up knowing much about what his life was like, but we do know that he remarried, so he didn't stay alone. Yeah, and so here the King David's not alone. Yeah.
Right. So by comparison, Abraham marries again sometime after Sarah dies, which means sometime after he's 137 years old, right? Look how old David is. He's old and decrepit. How old is he? Do we have it here? No. So let me just tell you, he's 70. He's 70 years old. So we, right away, and does it say it at the end? I don't remember. No, but it eventually says, what his age is in the rest of the Book of Kings, and he dies at 70. He's really actually close to death at this point. So even if we just think about that kind of, so first of all, the phrase is the same phrase. The phrase that's used to describe David getting into his dotage is the same phrase that's used for Abraham. So, in terms of the words, they're identical. In terms of the reality that they describe, there's a big difference, right? There's and that's part of what, is going to keep moving back and forth in this haftarah, is the same and yet completely different. The same situation, the same theme, and yet completely different. Both Abraham and David have a new woman in the house, to put it in a general kind of way. With Abraham, she's labeled as his wife, that he takes her as a wife. Keturah is her name, and she gets, that's significant. Here, there's a woman, but she's not a wife. She's just a servant girl.
And she's not named.
And she's not named.
Oh, she is named, yes.
She is,
Abishag the
Abishag is
Shunammite.
named.
Yeah.
She is
So
named.
she is, yeah.
She is named, and she will figure actually later after this haftarah in the subsequent events that happen. But she's not taken as a wife, and the prophet goes out of their way to say, and he's not having sexual relations with her. He's literally sleeping with her. He uses her as a hot water bottle, right, so to speak. So there's this kind of like, really, again, kind of, things are, this is not exactly a glorious ending. The ending in the Torah for Abraham, he is satisfied, he takes care of everything, all things are good. Yes, the beginning of the Torah portion, he cries over the loss of Sarah, but that's not what we have here, right? We have another aging or aged patriarch. He's king, he's the king, he's the patriarch of the people and patriarch of his family, and he's falling apart, right? And he can never get warm. He's shivering all the time.
It's an interesting contrast because, Abraham is old, and it talks about him specifically being blessed, but he's also thinking about Isaac and what's going to happen with Isaac. He's not just engrossed in himself. And here, David, who is obviously, doesn't seem very blessed at this point, it's all about, I'm not feeling well, right?
Yeah,
He's really become internal. His whole life is now about his bodily health. Yeah.
Right. Okay. Audrey, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, on a different note, I don't know if there's a connection here, but there are two young women. There's Rebecca and Abishag.
Right.
They're both beautiful, they're young, and they're there to give comfort to men who need comfort. So that just struck me as
Right.
thematically consistent.
Right. But in the scale of cringe factor, there's, quite a bit less cringe factor. I mean, there's a
With
little
Rebecca, of course.
with Rebecca is not, warming up her father-in-law's bed. So, yes. So again, the same, but very, very different.
Okay.
Good. All right. So now the idea of succession and the idea of the future, just to blow the rest of this story and give away the rest of how things develop, that becomes the theme of the rest of our Torah. So let's see what happens.
Okay, let's see. Now, Adonijah, son of Haggith, went about boasting, I will be king. He provided himself with chariots and horses and an escort of 50 outrunners. His father had never scolded him. Why did you do that? He was the one born after Absalom, and like him, was very handsome. He conferred with
Good.
He conferred with Joab, son of
Joab,
Zeruiah, right? Yoab. Where is that? Yeah. And with the priest Abiathar, and they supported Adoniah. But the priest Zadok, Benaiah son of
Yehoyada.
yeah, I hate these, but I can't read the transliteration. And I don't have time to like look. Yeah,
Right.
Prophet
And yeah,
Nathan.
it's actually fun when you hear non-Jewish like congregations and clergy, when I'm in
Yeah.
an interfaith situation and they start quoting these guys, and it's really cool to listen to how they say what their names are.
Oh, on Jeopardy. I watch Jeopardy.
Oh,
There's
yeah?
often categories about the Bible, and it's a hoot. Right? Yeah.
Wait,
Anyway,
Maib must get it right.
I've never been able
Maib has
to,
to get it right.
yeah,
I've never been able to read the transliterations.
yeah.
All
Always
right,
back and forth.
Okay.
here we go.
So where are we? The prophet Natan, Shimei, and Ray, and David's own fighting men did not side with Adoniah. Is that what I said right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Adoniah. It's
Adoniyahu, it says.
Adoniah.
Sometimes it's Adoniyahu, sometimes it's Adoniyah.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Adoniah or Adoniyahu made a sacrificial feast of sheep, oxen, and fatlings at the Zohelet stone, which is near Ein Rogel. He invited all his brother princes and all the king's courtiers of the tribes of Judah, but he did not invite the prophet Natan or Benaiah or the fighting men or his brother Solomon.
Okay, so let's stop here. So here we've got a real juicy, palace intrigue going on. There's a coup d'etat that's happening. Okay, and Adoniyahu is he has a claim to the throne. He's the son of David, and in fact, he is. If you where's that verse? He was the one born after Avshalom, and like him was very handsome. So on the one hand, it gives us, he's charismatic, he's handsome, but also in terms of birth order, he's one of the elder sons of the king. So he has a really strong claim that eventually he should be king.
But he's not the next. He's not the first one in line, right?
Well, the Avshalom is dead.
Right.
Avshalom is dead because Avshalom tried to be the king and did his own coup d'etat. So if we know the past stories that and the backstory of this, David's monarchy has been challenged from within already, and it's a little shaky. And so the introduction where it talks about David just being himself, aged and seemingly decrepit, is not simply a little vignette about it's not getting old is for sissies, but it's also politically important. The weaker that a king is, the more vulnerable he is, and the more attractive it is for people who want to take over, to try to seize the opportunity. So his physical weakness is also a political weakness. And it's not just politically in terms of his advisors and armies and so on, but even within his own family. His family now has this split. And Solomon is mentioned as being, shunted to the side. And we have trusted advisors who have now split into two camps, right? The pro-Adoniyahu camp and the pro-David camp. So that's part of the question. David hasn't croaked yet. So what's this business about Adoniyahu saying, I'm the king? I'm taking over. He's not compos mentis anymore. So somebody's got to take over, and it's it should be me. But he doesn't do it he does it publicly, but he doesn't do it inclusively. He knows that there are plenty of people that are not happy with this. So those people that are not invited, right? So he's really trying to create, a rally of his supporters. This is so today, and seize power by declaration, right? By just creating a fait accompli. So now we really are
Wow,
involved.
it is so now,
Right? Yeah.
it gives me comfort because at least you can look to something and say, oh, that happened.
Right. And so instead of reading the newspapers from now on, we should just read the Book of Kings and laugh If you think you have it tough now, believe me,
Mm.
right? This is nothing compared to the messes that that we were in before. So yeah. So but back to that theme, what Sarita mentioned before, the whole thing of Abraham trying to figure out what's gonna, who's gonna take over, who's gonna continue my legacy, right? So here, what do we have? We have again, same theme, but totally turned on its head, right? Totally turned opposite, because here we have, let's do just a little side-by-side comparison. Let's compare the two successors. We compared Abraham and David a little bit before. Let's compare Isaac and Adoniyahu. What can we say about the two of them side by side?
Well, Isaac at this stage of his life, and I think throughout really, is passive is the wrong word. I don't see him as passive, but goes along. He's on board. He's willing to do what his father wants. He's not at all interested in imposing himself in some power play. That's just not what he's about.
Right. So, I mean, most of the Torah reading is about people doing for Isaac. He is not even the one who's going to go find his own wife.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it's not only the binding of Isaac and the fact that he was, let his father do all of that kind of stuff, but just as he continues to grow, his mother dies. His father says, this guy's got to get married. Does he send Isaac to go get married? No. So he's total. I think, and the word passive is absolutely, a good word for that. Adoniyahu is the exact opposite, right? And we had another thing, the way that Isaac listens to his father. What do we have here? A little phrase here that turns that on its head. Yeah, Jen.
It implies that David never told him not to do something. So
Right.
he never scolded him. He never, always gave him his way, I guess, because
Right.
he's, I guess, replacing Absalom or something in
Right.
his. So not the most successful parenting, as it turns out. And
So successful or not, it's just not active. He's not in control. Whatever you want to say and however you want to evaluate it, Abraham was in control, right? For better or for worse, whether we like it or not. He's in control. He makes the decisions for his son, and his son goes along with it. And here we have a picture of a very ineffectual father who, even if he didn't like what his son was doing, would never say anything about it, would never scold his son. And he creates this spoiled brat who wants what he wants when he wants it. Yeah, Jen, you wanted to say more?
I also think this is setting up a rivalry, like a deadly rivalry, potentially between Solomon and Adoniyahu. Where in the case of Abraham, however bad a parent he might have been to Ishmael, we get at least hints that Isaac and Ishmael are okay with each other and maybe even, friends or close to friends or even close. So there's not, at the very least, they're not having a dynastic rivalry at this point.
Right. They show up together to bury their father. That's in our Torah reading, right? And that's one of these like eyebrow raising, whoa, so what does that mean? And what Jen is saying, there's a whole tradition midrashically in the Quran about peaceful relations between the different branches of the family. So yeah, here it doesn't seem that there's like shlom bayit, right? Family harmony is not the picture here. So yeah, any other additions to this? All right, then let's continue.
Just they point out that he's handsome. And that struck me as maybe, that he has charisma and can, he can attract people through his good looks.
Do we have any such a description? Does anybody remember anything like that being pointed out about Isaac?
No, but Rebecca sees him and falls in love with him. I mean, so there's got to be something.
Yeah, but that's what people say about all kinds of couples that are in love with each other. what does she see in him? It's not, this is, so yeah, so I think that that's an important point. This is a kind of a very much of a public, feature, right? It's a consensus. He's a looker. He's a good looking guy, right? Which has nothing to do with whatever's happening inside his soul, or whether he's worthy of being the king or anything like that. But he can use his looks, right? Okay, so okay, now we're at verse 11.
Okay, then Natan said to Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, you must have heard that Adoniah, son of
Haggith.
Son of Haggith, has assumed the kingship without the knowledge of our Lord David.
Okay,
Now
so
take-
just wait time out for a second. Just back story, a little information. So here we have Bathsheba is identified.
Right.
And why she's identified, it's not because the narrator doesn't think we know who she is, but because this is her standing, right? She's got something at stake here. She is, the queen mother of somebody who is assumed by some people to be the next, to be the prince, to be the next king, right? But Natan, who is Natan? Does anybody want to share with us who this guy is? Who is Nathan? Natan.
Is he a
He's the
prophet?
He's a prophet.
Yeah, it's a prophet, yeah.
Not just a prophet, but the prophet.
Yeah.
He is the prophet in David's court. He is the prophet who specifically, with regard to Bathsheba, stood up to David and said, what the heck do you think you're doing, taking this woman away from her husband just because you happen to be infatuated with her, right? He admonishes David, and of course, in that kind of situation, he's sticking his neck out. David could say, who are you to challenge me? Off with his head. So Nathan is a prophet. He's called a prophet in other places. Somebody's got something going on here that's making noise. Please, let's see if we can get that muted, please. So he is a prophet. He is God's mouthpiece, which is what a prophet is supposed to be, a voice for justice, a voice for morality. And he's not afraid of David. He talks truth to power, just like the rest of the prophets later on exemplify that with their books, with their prophecies. Here we just know about him in terms of the stories that are told in the book of Kings. He doesn't have a book of his own, but that quality of his, we need to remember that. We need to know that, right? We need to know that that's who he is. And we also have him in position here where he has not abandoned David, right? Even though he gets angry at David for being a sinner, David's response was repentance. So as far as the stories in the book of the end of Samuel and then the book of Kings goes, David will pay for his sins, but it's not the deal breaker. David stays King David, and David stays the progenitor of the house of David, as opposed to Saul. When Saul sins, he loses his kingship, he loses his standing completely. So Nathan is sticking by David. Nathan is therefore not only just a prophet, he's also a servant. He's one of the courtiers. He's one of the servants in David's palace. And now we've got a jump cut. After we've got the outside shot of Adoniah doing everything that he's doing. This is very cinematic. First we get David's bedroom, right? And the chambers outside the bed, the whispers, Avishag is put in there, very intimate, right? Then we go outside, we get crowd scenes, and Adoniah, stirring up the populace and so on with a bunch of intrigue. And now we have another side chamber, right? Where Natan, and Bathsheba are conferring between themselves. David is out of earshot. Other people presumably are too, because they understand that there's, a coup d'etat happening here. What are they going to do about this? And Nathan takes the lead. So back to that. So David doesn't know that, that this is what's happening with Adoniah. Everybody else knows. David. So why not? Why doesn't David know?
Because he's sick.
He's ill. He's just, that's his world. Yeah.
Right. Go look again at verse 4. Right at the beginning. Right. So it says, and the young woman was very, very pretty, just like Adoniah. Right. And she was an attendant to the king, waited upon him, but the king was not intimate with her. In Hebrew, the words are the last three words. V'hamelech lo yida'ah. He did not know her, right? Because, the biblical sense of knowing, right? Which means to have intimate relations. And now we have, again, David lo yada, right? So there's an echo there with, the other associations. This guy is out of it. He's not really on top of things. And this, complete undermining of his whole situation is beyond him. He doesn't know what's going on. Okay.
Now take my advice so that you may save your life and the life of your son Solomon. Go immediately to King David and say to him, did not you, O Lord King, swear to your maidservant, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne. Then why has Adoniah become king? While you were still there talking with the king, I will come in after you and confirm your words.
Okay, so if you look at the note, so what is he saying? Let's just digest this. He's saying, first of all, you know what the situation is outside the palace. David doesn't know, we do. And now we have to do something about it, right? So he says, you go in there. You go in there, you break the news to King David, right?
We'll break the news and remind him of his promise.
Right, that you swore an oath that the person who was going to, you designated your heir already. You said that Solomon's going to be the next king. So what's this Adoniyahu business? So are you going to stand up for your oath or not? So now look at the note 13 at verse 13.
Yes, it says, this appears to be a ruse because there is no record of such a conversation between them.
So do you buy that? Jen buys it.
Why not? She's desperate. Solomon could be killed. Or she could be killed if the coup works. So,
right. So this is a huge disagreement among all of the readers of this story. There is no record beforehand. We're at the very beginning of the book of Kings. The whole story of David, Bathsheba, and Solomon is in the book of Samuel, the second book of Samuel. There is no record in the book of Samuel that David actually explicitly says that Solomon should be the king. There's focusing on Solomon and so on and so forth. There's the getting rid of Avshalom when he has no right to be the king, even though he's the older son. He's older than Solomon, and he's older than Adoniah. But he's gotten out of the picture. So some people say we don't have any record of this. This must be a ruse, as it says here. A bunch of baloney. How can they say this? How are they going to be able to say this to David if it never happened?
But she's not making this up. I mean, if this is
That's what the claim is. This note is saying we're going to make this up.
Right, but Natan is suggesting that to her. So I'm saying if this is to benefit her and her son, right? She's not thinking about this and going, oh, I have to find a way to get my son elevated and declared the king. It's Natan who is suggesting that, and Natan is a prophet.
So therefore, so he's a prophet. So what? So
he may know, or of course, he's also been very close to David, so he may know that this had happened. And it's not, there's no immediate benefit to Natan to do this. So what I'm saying is if it's a ruse, she's not doing this. I mean, she's not creating this way to aggrandize herself and her son. Yeah.
Right. So you're making arguments against the idea that it's a ruse.
Yeah.
You're saying just the fact that there's no record of him saying this doesn't mean that he didn't say it. We've had many places in the Bible where we find a delayed revelation about something that happened earlier.
Mhm.
Right. So let's give credence to it here. So that's the counter argument. The counter argument is there are many readers who say, no. Just that, how would they get away with it? There's an answer. Some people would say, you know how we can imagine this if we think that it really was a trick? Because this man David has lost it. He's going to be totally manipulable. We can tell him anything about what he said once upon a time and he'll believe us because he doesn't have control over his own faculties anymore, right? This is a kind of like an elder abuse kind of situation where we can push him around any way we want. That's the argument for that it's trickery, that it's a lie, that it's a made up story, and that it's basically another power maneuver and a manipulation on the part of the party that stands to lose if Adoniyahu succeeds. Sarita began giving the arguments why no. Let's take this actually seriously as a possibility. He really did make this thing. We don't have to say that they're pushing him around. We don't have to say that they're lying to him or trying to manipulate him in that kind of way. So wait, Audrey wanted to say something. I don't know, Jen, you also wanted to say? Okay, Audrey, then Jen, go ahead.
So just in terms of reminding us of the times we're living in, because I am interested in that aspect of things right now.
It's 2021.
Yes. So Nathan is it has to do with the character of the people speaking and the portrayal in this story of who you believe. I mean, Nathan is a prophet. Adoniah is an agitator and is portrayed as a very self-serving kind of guy. So I would go with Nathan in terms of character, in terms of judgment, and in terms of knowing what's what. So that's another element to it, in my view.
Okay, good. Jen?
So, I mean, we can imagine David might have implied that at one time, especially early in their relationship, or this is giving him an out now to say, even if he kind of knows he didn't really actually say it, it gives him a reason to pick Solomon now if he can retroactively claim that he had promised that. I do think it's a big thing to leave out of Samuel if he made this promise and now we're going through this dynastic struggle and we don't know that was a promise already made. So I feel like that's, from a literary point of view, totally cheating. I was like, oh, by the way, David already said this, that, it was totally going to be Solomon. So, but it does give, Natan might just have an inkling that, Solomon will be better for the kingdom, which may or may not be the case, or at least for getting the temple built or for whatever Natan's, goals are here. And now David can go, oh, yeah, look, I mean, I said it. I mean, here's Natan and here's Bathsheba saying that I said this thing. There's a lot of different levels this can go by.
So this can, and like I said, this is an unresolved dispute. People to this very moment, to this right here in this meeting, don't necessarily see eye to eye about it. But I want to highlight a little bit of what was mentioned on the other side, and that is to note that it's not Bathsheba who comes up with this idea. It's Nathan who comes up with this idea. And then that's why it's so crucial to how do we evaluate Nathan's role here? Is Nathan the prophet, or is Nathan another one of these conniving inner court, people that's just trying to protect their own power, their own position, manipulate this doddering old fool who's the king. How do we evaluate the integrity of Nathan? And it's not so simple. It's not simple one way or the other. I'm not going to solve it.
I'm also wondering about the relationship between Natan and Bathsheba. So he was not in favor of David starting this relationship, right? It was wrong for David to have started it. but David did, and there's a son. And so here now he's coming to this woman that he had told David, you shouldn't be doing this, you shouldn't be having this relationship with her. And yet he is coming to her to say, take care of your own life, take care of your son's life. We're seeing this section out of context. Has
So I
there
tried
been
to give it-
anything about the evolving relationship between the two?
Yes,
Yeah.
but I tried to give it like really quick before.
Yeah.
So we can't dwell on it too much. Real quick, just a couple of facts, and then how that gets digested. You have to go back to Samuel. The child that is born to David and Bathsheba, when he first takes her, that child dies in infancy as punishment for David's doing the wrong thing. Then her husband dies. So then she actually then becomes a widow, and then David is, forget about the stickiness of it. David is actually then eligible to take Bathsheba as a wife, and he does. So there's, in terms of like just hard and fast plot lines, that kind of legitimating of Bathsheba happens back in Samuel.
Right.
Well, it starts out wrong. David has to repent. He gets punished. And then we start all over again, and love wins out. And Bathsheba is accepted as okay. And Solomon is born subsequently, and therefore Solomon is okay. So that's what we have to just accept for now. Okay, so let's keep on going. And let's 15. Go ahead.
Okay, so Bathsheba went to the king in his chamber. The king was very old.
We know that.
Right, and Abishag the Shunammite was waiting on the king. Bathsheba bowed low in homage to the king, and the king asked, "What troubles you?"
So I just want to point out, just in terms of storytelling, this is such a beautiful stroke,
Yeah.
right? This is such a wonderful setup of a scene, because here is the older, she's older by now, right? She's the matron, her son is grown up, and here's this young, beautiful, maiden that's hanging out with the king. She's not. She has to, it's a little bit like, when Esther goes, do I have to go into the king? I mean, he hasn't asked me to come to him. So, so there's all of that kind of stuff, all of that kind of psychological, interpersonal stuff happening within the other drama, which is, for the sake of the future of the Jewish people. So she goes in. Go ahead.
Okay, and the king asked, "What troubles you?" She answered him, "My lord, you yourself swore to your maidservant by the Lord your God, your son Solomon shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne. Yet now Adoniah has become king, and you, my lord the king, know nothing about
In this
it."
case, in this case, the Hebrew actually really is Adoniah. In the past, it was Adoniyahu in the Hebrew, and they made it Adoniah in the English, but here it actually is Adoniah. So go ahead.
Okay. He has prepared a sacrificial feast of a great many oxen, fatlings, and sheep, and he has invited all the king's sons, and Abiathar the priest, and Joab commander of the army, but he has not invited your servant Solomon. And so the eyes of all Israel are upon you, O Lord King, to tell them who shall succeed my lord the king on the throne. Otherwise, when my lord the king lies down with his fathers, my son Solomon and I will be regarded as traitors.
Right. The literal, simple meaning of the Hebrew word is sinners, but sinning against the king. And if you are a sinner against the king, what happens to you?
You're killed.
You're killed, right? So that's, their lives are at stake here, not just their status, but they will be killed, right? This is all a copy out of Shakespearean plays, right? This is all, taken from
Kind
there.
of Game of Thrones.
Right, and that's also derivative from all that, right? All that stuff. So yes, go ahead.
She was still talking to the king when the prophet Nathan arrived. They announced to the king, "The prophet Nathan is here," and he entered the king's presence. Bowing low to the king with his face to the ground, Nathan said, "O Lord King, you must have said, Adoniah shall succeed me as king, and he shall sit upon my throne. For he has gone down today and prepared a sacrificial feast of a great many oxen, fatlings, and sheep. He invited all the king's sons and the army officers and Abiathar the priest. At this very moment, they are eating and drinking with him.
Let me just for my own crankiness. It's Evyatar.
Ah, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Evyatar, okay. At this very moment, they are eating and drinking with him, and they are shouting, "Long live King Adoniah." Did I say that right? Yeah. Okay, but he did not invite me, your servant, or the priests, Zadok,
Sadok.
Zadok, or
The
Benaiah.
tzaddik.
Huh?
Sadok, like tzaddik.
Zadok, yeah, okay,
Sadok.
right. There's, yeah. Or I'm looking,
Benaiah.
I'm trying to find it quickly. Benaiah, these things, Benaiah, son of
Yehoyada.
Yehodah, or your servant Solomon.
Yehoyada. Yehoyada.
Where is it? There it is. I see it. Yehoyada. Okay. Or your servant Solomon. Can this decision have come from my lord the king without your telling your servant who is to succeed to the throne of my lord the king? King David's response was, summon Bathsheba. Wasn't she there already? She entered the king's presence and stood before the king. And the king took an oath saying, as the Lord lives, who has rescued me from every trouble, the oath I swore to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, that your son Solomon should succeed me as king, and that he should sit upon my throne in my stead, I will fulfill this very day. Bathsheba bowed low in homage to the king with her face to the ground, and she said, may my Lord King David live forever.
Right? David Melech Yisrael Chai v'Kayam. I mean, that's not exactly what it says there, but that's the sense. So, and that's the end of the Haftorah, right? Right. And of course, in the end, Adoniyahu gets, defeated and killed later after Solomon, not in the beginning. After Solomon becomes king, he still tries to get rid of Solomon, and that's when he gets killed. But at this point, he's defeated, but he's very, mercifully spared. And given a second chance, which he blows. But back to this. Okay, so let's try to see what kind of elements do we see here, and what kind of comparisons, connections can we make now with our Torah? On the one hand, it's so different, right? So very, very different. The reality is completely transformed. The developments are, we're talking about a family out in the desert someplace, with flocks of sheep running around. That's our scene for Abraham and Isaac and all that kind of stuff. And here we've got courtroom intrigue and so on and so forth. So very, 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 very different. So what do we make of that? What do we make of the juxtaposition of these two very starkly different scenes? Because that's what the rabbis are saying. They're saying, you know what, we can gain something by putting these two stories next to each other.
So in terms of the quality of David's, sort of the end of David's life versus the quality of the end of Abraham's life. I mean, Abraham is satisfied, he has his children, and he's like, you get a sense of him surrounded by his family. And here, David has, his son, one of his sons is ignoring him, fighting against the other son, and it's just, totally not
just ignoring him. He's taken over. He's probably going to lock him up or kill him.
Yeah.
Or he'll put him in some cushy little jail that with velvet curtains or something. But he's going to get him out of the picture. Right, he's Adoniyahu's plans for his father are not ever articulated, but as far as he's concerned, his father's dead. Right, his father's gone. So that's part of the oppositeness of this. But let's just, how does the Haftorah end?
Bathsheba saying, may my Lord King David live forever. So that's
Chi Adoni HaMelech David Liolam. That's like a cheer. It's an exclamation. If you look earlier, If Where does, I think he says it, right? No, he doesn't. Does he say it here? I thought for some reason, but that exclamation, certainly by implication, is also what's happening with Adoniyahu, right? That's Adoniyahu's purpose of convening that public, ceremony he wants that's what they're cheering out there, right? So that's what they're cheering for Adoniyahu. Here, this is, a huzzah, and this is a celebration of David. If we think about the beginning of this chapter and this ending, there's a tremendous transformation in David's stature, right? In the beginning, we're watching a guy slowly fall apart and die. By the end, it's officially proclaimed, this guy's going to live forever, right? This guy, because of the decisions that he has made, because of his proclamations, his power, his vitality, don't mess with this guy. It's assured. It's guaranteed. It will last forever. Le'olam, forever. Right? How? Through Solomon, right? Not necessarily through him. So there's a kind of a rejuvenation or a reviving of David's stature at that moment. How does he get there? So who's he surrounded by? So Sarita started talking about who is he surrounded by? Well, Adoniah is not exactly surrounded by it. Adoniah will surround the palace eventually and take it over, but Adoniah is rebelling against him. What does David have around him? So we start with this young damsel, right? We start with some solicitous courtiers who then recruit a young woman to be able to keep him company so that he doesn't freeze at night. Okay, so we get a very limited, icky, physical kind of support system, right? But then as this challenge comes from the outside, from his own son, then we start finding out that he has some other, helpers, right? Who are
Natan.
so Natan more than anybody, right? Because you could say that Bathsheba, after all, she's looking after her son. She's got a stake here, but what does Natan have here? Why can't Natan simply switch sides? Natan could have gone, sent a little note to Adoniyahu saying, I'm your man. Okay, I've decided, that God is angry at your father. He was always a reprobate all this time. I did my best. He's lost. Forget it. I'm coming over to you. That happens in all of these kinds of, palace intrigues and coup d'etat all the time. So Natan doesn't do that, right? Natan decides to stick with David, and that makes him, he's faithful, he's loyal, right? We called him a prophet before. Look at how he identifies himself in verse 26. Oh, yeah, there it is, right? Yechia melech Adoniah, long 25. Long live King Adoniah.
Yeah.
That's the corresponding thing to long live King David. King David will live forever, right? So that's the same thing. Okay, now 26. How does he introduce himself?
Your servant.
Your servant. So servant. Let's think back to the Torah reading.
Oh, the servant who went to find the wife for Isaac.
Abraham could never have accomplished anything with regard to assuring the future of his family, the future of Isaac, unless he had a loyal servant, right? That loyal servant is actually unnamed in the Torah reading, but we'll call him Eliezer. And that loyal servant has to go out there and figure out how to make his boss's plan come true, right? How does he do it? He prays to God. He prays to God and he says, please help me out here. My master has always been your loyal servant, and I am Abraham's loyal servant. I need you to come through for me here, right? And then we have the whole rest of the story there. Jen, what do you want to say?
I mean, I kind of remember that that was selfless, because wasn't Abraham's servant actually in line to inherit?
You would
As
right.
well?
Abraham said earlier, he said, look, if I don't have an heir, let my servant Eliezer be my heir. And there, we could have imagined that Eliezer would have once upon a time had hopes for that. Of course, now we'd have to put that on a little bit to the side, because there is Isaac. I mean, Isaac is there. Having a wife for Isaac is not necessarily, the condition for him being the heir or not. But yes, Eliezer is selfless. Eliezer is putting himself out for his master, the way that Nathan is putting himself out here. In the story itself, in the Torah reading, God is appealed to, God is recognized, but God does nothing. God doesn't talk to anybody. When Eliezer or the servant prays to God, God doesn't answer him. Here, is there any God involvement at all? Not at all. Right? We have to stop, but really quick. This is a continuing development from that story that we had in the Torah reading, where God takes a back seat. And human beings have to figure out what is the right thing for us to do in God's name, in the name of what's right and just, in the name of what we've already promised. I actually think that he did make the promise. So, David has always been this kind of slippery character. Do I stand up finally for who I have to be loyal to or not? So loyalty is this kind of like leitmotif that flows through the Torah reading and then into here, with this idea of God's not going to pull all the strings for us. God is not going to always make what we need to happen. How much do we put ourselves out on the line to make the right thing as we understand it happen? Right? And that's the story that we get here, with all of its total descent into much more corrupt, kind of messy reality. Here we have a couple of exemplary people who struggle the best they can to be loyal to each other and to the truth. All right, that's one way to read it. Take care, Yeshikoah.
Thank you.